been called a street fighter and the most dangerous man in American politics.
You argue for your freedom, and they call you a xenophobe. You argue for your country, and they call you a racist.
I like Mr. Bannon. He's a friend of mine. He's a good man. He is not a racist, I can tell you that. He's a good person.
Look at who he's put in charge of his campaign. Steve Bannon, the head of a right-wing website called Breitbart.com. Breitbart embraces ideas on the extremist fringe of the conservative right.
Let them call you racist. Let them call you xenophobes. Let them call you nativist. Wear it as a badge of honor.
We should shake hands again, because I come from a polite country and
I love
that's what we do.
Shake hands and look somebody in the eye. Look, is that Dan, is that back door closed?
It is not fully closed.
Now I'm in a reality show.
You're doing this.
Exactly.
This is, now you know how the White, this was the well-honed, this is the campaign.
Yeah.
Now you know why the Clintons, by the way, now you know why Clinton didn't take it seriously. Because you can't take it seriously.
Yeah.
Still rolling. Okay, set.
Critical midterm elections coming up. How high are the stakes for Donald Trump's presidency?
First off, I don't think they're midterms. I think that the opposition party media, the Democratic Party, the entire permanent political class aligned against President Trump in the campaign and then after he took office have won one big victory, and that is they're going to get a do-over. This is, people that think about this as a midterm, it's one of the things that we're trying to pound into conservatives' heads. This is a reelect. It's all on the table here, right? If they take the House, if the Time's Up movement, the resistance, this is as high a stakes as possible. If we lose the House, the Trump presidency will grind to a halt.
You just used the term pound, and today is actually the day that you've released the trailer for your new film. Now, it depicts the coming election as a violent battle. Why so extreme?
Well, I think if you look at what's happening in the streets with Antifa and these neo-Nazis, everything, that the country is really almost like the 1960s. To a degree, because of the two sides of what's arguing, you see the country is coming apart. And I think all these issues have to be put on the table. And so it is a time, it's a time that the country's quite divided. And that's why this midterm is so important. That's why the 2016 election is so important. You have to decide it at the ballot box.
You say yourself that you won the 2016 election. You were just talking about the chaos in the campaign, but you won that election with not a lot of money, as you say, and really with fear and anger. Do you think that you can rely on the deplorables to come out again this time?
I'm not so sure it's fear and anger as rationality. I think working class people and middle class people in this country realize that something's wrong, is that, upon their shoulders rest the entire tax burden, and upon their shoulders really rest, this kind of liberal post-war international order, the kind of globalist system that's out there, right? They are quite rational. So now what you're going to see, I think, in this election is there's still a lot of anger out there. And I think that this anger can be harnessed. This anger can be harnessed to have another big victory for Trump. The one thing different in 2016, the Clinton campaign, as we were joking beforehand, we were fairly disorganized, except on the ground. We had a terrific ground game. In addition, Trump had this kind of powerful populist message, which she missed. She really went for identity politics. They also didn't take us very seriously. They saw a collection of kind of quasi-amateurs. We had a lot of people just kind of filling the gaps there, and they didn't take us seriously. The difference in this election is that these groups are what I call fully woke. They understand exactly what's going on. They're looking at the right congressional districts. So this one's going to have to go in kind of full consciousness. You're not going to sneak up on them like we did last time.
You mentioned the Time's Up movement. Now, just for the sake of our audience, that's the extension in America of the Me Too movement.
It's the high. Me Too is about sexual harassment. Time's Up is really about the power dynamics in society.
This is our time. This is our moment. The women that put themselves on the front line and accuse that man, Mr. Weinstein, and brought him down by using their voice. We need to do the same for Trump.
You describe it as being primal.
Yes.
What do you mean by that?
I mean, it's trying to upend 5,000 years of kind of the way civilization's been structured, whether that's Hindu, Islamic, or Judeo-Christian Western civilization, kind of the patriarchy. It's after that. And I'm not arguing whether it's right or wrong. What I'm saying is that this movement is much deeper than this sexual harassment. This Time's Up movement, if you listen to its leaders, if you listen to what its ideology is, I equate it kind of like the French Revolution. The French Revolution was very primal and tried to go to the core of society and upend it and restructure it. And so I don't agree with the ideology. I have a lot of respect for its latent power. I've seen it here in the United States since the day that Trump has been elected. It's one of the most powerful forces politically we have in the country today.
One of the things that's happening is that Donald Trump has lost some support, particularly amongst college-educated white women.
Yes.
Do you think that on the back of these movements, like Time's Up and Me Too, do you think that, are you worried actually that now, this time round, women are going to punish Donald Trump for his behavior?
Not punish, but I'm very worried. Let's go back to 2016. I think one of the things that shocked people is we won white women 52-48. We won high school educated white women, I think 69-37 or something like that. These are extraordinary numbers. There's definitely been a softening. My argument about this re-election that's going to take place on November 6th, or the midterms, is that there's not time right now, okay, to go out and do a lot of outreach on either policy or tone, because I think a lot of this is tone. A lot of these people just see Trump as a disruptor, and they just don't like the style. I don't know if it's punished, but one of the realities that I keep telling people is that we have to be very focused on the fact that the numbers we had in 2016 among college-educated women, both Republican and independent, are not going to be there.
Not coming back. Now, you've really challenged the Democrats to make the midterms an election about impeachment.
Well, they have. So here's what I think. If you look at the grassroots of the Democratic left are doing exactly what the Tea Party movement did in 2010, and I admire the fact they have enthusiasm for what they believe. I don't believe it, but I believe in democracy, and what they're doing is going out and getting votes. They're ringing doorbells and knocking on doors. I said, hey, they have made this a referendum on Donald Trump. I'm just saying we got to face reality and not sit there and go, oh, well, let's lose, and then we can run against the House.
So if you lose, though, if it doesn't go the way you want and that referendum goes against you, is that the end of your agenda?
No. Come on, we're gonna have good days and bad days. We're gonna win and lose. Well,
so hang on, it can't be a referendum on President Trump, and you lose and then you just move on.
I think the accomplishments he's made in 18 months are extraordinary. The other thing you have to remember, too, which I say is a strategic major advantage of this, by early October, if it looks like it's not going to be a blue wave, I believe that the left in the Democratic Party is going to turn on its establishment. Remember, I've been at civil war with the Republican establishment for about 10 years. The Democrats have not had their civil war. There's been no Breitbart. There's been no guys like Bannon that wanted to take on the establishment. I believe if they do not deliver a resounding victory on November 6th, and that victory is tied to impeaching Donald Trump and stopping his program, you're going to see an internecine war start in the Democratic Party that will take years to go through. It's something that should have happened years ago. It should have definitely happened when Clinton lost in 2016. How could they have $2 billion, have a candidate like Clinton, that entire apparatus? Here you got Donald Trump and a collection of clowns around him, and you lose? They weren't held accountable because, oh, guess what? The Russians stole it from us, okay? That was their cover. If they lose this November, the civil war inside the Democratic Party is going to consume them for years. It's going to make Donald Trump's re-election in 2020 a foregone conclusion.
You're different from quite a lot of your colleagues in that you respect Robert Mueller.
Yes.
You're not asking for him to be sacked, are you?
No.
What's the difference? Why not?
Well, first off, Mueller is a combat Marine. I mean, he's got a tremendous record in the FBI, et cetera. I was one, as a public record, I was quite opposed to firing Comey. And the reason is I don't think there's any collusion. I think it's very imperative for Bob Mueller to finish the investigation, but I think the report's got to be issued before the November election. I think the American people got to weigh in here.
Presumably Robert Mueller's just going to do that, finish that report when he sees fit. And if there is evidence of crime, either of obstruction of justice or a crime that effectively is collusion, then impeachment is a natural course. You accept that?
Well, here's what I think is going to happen is I think Mueller is already dealing out for people in Australia, whether it's Cohen, whether it's Manafort, as he sees potential potential crimes already. He's dealing those out to prosecutors to take those to trial. If the American people back Trump, I think the Mueller thing will fade away over time, unless there's real evidence of specific crimes that have to go to prosecutors.
And which presumably you can't really know what happened. You can't really know whether there was collusion in the inner circle of Trump's campaign at times when you weren't there.
Look, as the CEO of the campaign, in 88 days when we were down, 12 or 16 points the day we won, we couldn't collude between the RNC and the Trump camp ground game in Pennsylvania. I've said from day one, there's no collusion. If they think obstruction of justice comes around firing Comey or what happened on Air Force One or with Jeff Sessions, then he ought to put it in a report and he ought to bring it before Congress, and let's see how the chips fall. I'm a big boy and I've got a lot of respect for Mueller. I've also said, and I was one of the guys around when Rosenstein got picked, I have said from day one on this issue of Crossfire Hurricane. A Crossfire Hurricane is the code word for the investigation that the FBI counterterrorism started about the Trump campaign.
Started with an Australian.
Started with an Australian. Well, how that Australian got into it is going to be quite interesting because there are subpoenas. Not from Trump. There's subpoenas from Capitol Hill, from 5 different committees. Okay,
Are you suggesting that our former Foreign Minister Alexander Downer, who was at the center of the information about the emails that came from Russia, which became the FBI investigation, are you saying that he did something wrong?
I am saying what I want to see is I want to see those subpoenas executed. I want to see the information. At the end of the day, the intelligence apparatus works like the post office. And what I mean by that, there's a chain of command and there's an approval for everything that went on.
Let me cycle back.
No, but I think it's the heart of what Trump's fighting every day.
I understand.
People call it the deep state. It is not the deep state. This is in your face, okay? And this Crossfire Hurricane goes to the beating heart of this kind of what I call the nullification project of President Trump. It is outrageous.
Trying to shut him down. So
but by the way, they were trying to shut him down even before he got into office. That's the key thing. This Crossfire Hurricane with the Australians, the British, all started in the summer of 2016. People just have to keep this in mind.
The only problem with this is it's so interesting that we could spend our whole time talking about it. So we'll put it aside and we'll come back to it because I'm kind of into it too, right? I just want to tease out a little bit of the relationship with Donald Trump. Now, you've already mentioned that you said that the sacking of James Comey was a terrible mistake, the worst mistake in modern political history.
Very subtle.
Very subtle.
Nuanced.
I think I got what you were getting at there. I think I got it. But you went on to say that Don Jr. was treasonous and unpatriotic for attending the Trump Tower meeting.
By the way, I did correct that.
Well, this is the thing. This is my question. Yeah. Your philosophy is never apologize, never back down, never explain. What is it about your relationship with the Trumps that made you break your rules?
It's not because I thought in that regard it's the professionals I was really talking. It was Manafort.
How can you make a distinction between Paul Manafort? It was Don Jr. who answered in a breathlessly enthusiastic way that he wanted to set up the meeting when he heard there was information coming from Putin.
But Don Jr. and Jared are family. They're not in that regard.
But they were part of the campaign. They're not idiots.
I know. But they were volunteers. Okay, I mean this is part of the family. They're well intentioned and they're very smart. But these are volunteers. Paul Manafort's a professional.
Yeah. Now look, but back to the relationship with Trump, because what happened at that time is you know exactly how volatile Donald Trump is. You know him well enough. He turned on you, and that's what he does. He attacks people very personally when he gets angry.
By the way, I come from an Irish family. I got 2 brothers. This goes off my back like water off a duck.
Does it mean it's for show? Is it real or is it for show? Is that anger real or is it show?
Well, I think he's like me. He runs a little hot sometimes, right? With President Trump, look, he's one of the best guys I've ever met. He did not need to run for this office. And what drives people crazy, when I say in this town, and this is among Republicans, when I say he's a historic figure, he's an historic president, he's a transformational president, and you see it every day, drives them nuts.
Yeah.
Okay? So you got to separate the signal from the noise.
Yes.
All the tweets and the attacks are the noise.
Yeah.
The signal is what he stands for and what he does every day. So I come from an Irish Catholic family that around the table I've gotten 100 times worse than what...
Sure, but we accept that the President of the United States is different to what you get around the Bannon family dinner table. This is not a Catholic family tearing each other.
No, but he's got a different. The reason he's president. Listen, we have gone into what I call the McLuhan-esque age of politics. In the future, you're not going to see, I think, leaders in this country, and particularly people running for president, that will become president, that actually work on city council, go to the state legislature, run in Congress. I think we're in a media age. That's what I've said when they asked me about the Time's Up movement and 2020 candidates. I said I think Oprah Winfrey's the #1 potential, and I think people like The Rock or Mark Cuban, or people, or Avignetti. I think these people have real opportunities, and people in this town roll their eyes.
Yeah.
Just like when I used to say, hey, Donald Trump is going to be the guy to win the Republican nomination, people left.
It does sound sometimes like it's someone who's not fully in control of their emotions. Is that really what you want inside the White House?
Okay, let's talk about that for a second. Everybody said in the campaign, this guy, and one of the things we talked about, giving people permission to vote for him about commander-in-chief. There has never been somebody that's been less trigger happy and more prudent about decisions. It took us 7 or 8 months to make the Afghanistan decision, okay? It took us so many months even to come up with the Korea situation and to get engaged in the negotiations there. Donald Trump is very prudent about how he goes about things. You got to separate the signal from the noise.
But
the Twitter account, the Twitter feed, and some of the comments, and I've taken it as bad as anybody.
Yeah.
I just tell people, hey, you just got to, that comes with the territory.
There's never a moment when you look at it and think that it's denigrating the office.
I think the office has changed over time, right? It just has. Is this the way that the founders ran it in the 1760s? Although politics then was just as brutal. If we had a better understanding of history, we understand. That's why I kept telling President Trump about Andrew Jackson, of how the East Coast establishment, John Quincy Adams, and that crowd stole the election from him as a populist. And so we've had bare knuckle history before. I think President Trump's just got a different style, and I think people are getting accustomed to that style. But you're just going to have to accept it. This is the whole thing about Republican women, independent women. What I keep telling people, the style is the style and the tone is the tone.
But if you lose them, if they don't like it and you lose them, you lose.
Well, I'm not so sure about that. I'm not so sure about that. I think that you have to expand out that kind of working class base today, right, that will vote for Trump in middle class. I think people are understanding. I've got an economy growing at 4%. I've got historic lows in Black and Hispanic unemployment. People are seeing the benefits of this economic nationalism. And you're going to have to, some people love his style and some people are turned off by it. But if you look at the results, one of the reasons I started this group is say, hey, there's a much deeper narrative here of what this guy's accomplishing. And that affects you.
And that's all about economic nationalism. And obviously that agenda that you teamed up with him is still going. The economy is clearly in good shape, but that economy was already improving under Obama. The trajectory of jobs growth for Hispanics and Blacks was already happening under Obama.
Okay.
It's continuing.
This is the mainstream media's Kool-Aid. President Obama, the growth on President Obama was 1.9%. It was 1.9%.
Coming out of the global financial crisis.
Well, okay.
Totally different circumstances.
But let's talk about the global financial crisis.
Yeah.
In 2008, we're coming to the 10th year anniversary. We have a complete implosion of the world's capital markets, okay, brought on by the elites. President Obama comes in, and he's the most progressive president we've had in the history of the country. He would admit that. He was proud of that. The permanent political class and the elites in this country literally just created money. We have a fancy term called quantitative easing. They just created liquidity. So if you're an asset holder of real estate or stocks or intellectual property, you've had the greatest 10-year run in history. If you're a working person who President Obama's supposed to be worried about, you've paid the bills. You've been stiffed. You haven't had a raise. Average family in this country can't put together $400 of cash. If you take away the equity in your house, average person in this country, I think, has got $10,000 in the bank for retirement. And that's why the Republican establishment hates us, because what we've done with President Trump is turned this more into a workers' party. So he's fundamentally, that's why these trade deals are so important right now. And who's he getting the most grief from? The Republican establishment and Wall Street. What he's doing, these trade deals are much deeper than just tariffs and trade. This is about bringing jobs back and high-value added jobs that bring worth and dignity to workers, and they can actually have one income that maybe will support a family.
It's interesting when you talk about the global financial crisis, as we call it, you do sound, in fact, during the campaign, you sounded a lot more like Bernie Sanders.
We share a lot. One of the things I do all the time in this house is have meetings with Bernie's people. I think there's 25% of the Bernie movement that can be taken over to the Trump movement. So you say, were you going to replace Republican suburban women who are maybe turned off by some of this stuff? There's a larger worker base of Black and Hispanic working class and some of Bernie's people that are economic nationalists, and they see the benefits.
So right now, a trade war has begun, and as we've just discussed,
you're wrong there. You're just dead wrong.
Why that?
Because
why
the trade war has not just begun. This is not a trade war. And Australia sees this. Australia is at the front lines of this. We're in an economic war with China, okay? Not a trade war. China's been economic war with the West, and they are not authoritarian, they're a totalitarian mercantilist system. They always talk about this international rules-based order. The Chinese don't play by any rules. They don't have any internal rules. It's a completely totalitarian regime, not the Chinese people, the regime. Okay, what Donald Trump has said, he's the first president, because the elites in our country, just like the elites in Australia said, the rise of China is inexorable. It's the second law of thermodynamics.
Because we can't continue to allow China to rape our country, and that's what they're doing. It's the greatest theft in the history of the world. I have to say we've developed a great relationship with China, other than the fact that they've been killing us on trade for the last long period of time. Killing us, absolutely killing the United States on trade.
Do you know what Trump said? I don't think so. Trump has been arguing this for 30 and 40 years. What Donald Trump has done is taken the United States government and said, hey, we're just not going to be a punching bag anymore. And that's why I keep saying Australia is the canary in the mine shaft. Australia can show you when good and decent people kind of play by the rules, and the next thing they look around, and many of the economic resources and economic assets of a country are owned by another country, and all of a sudden you start seeing influence operations on their politicians.
Well,
that's what's happening.
Let's just pull those pieces apart.
What Donald Trump did is to say, what the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take on trade in a scale that's never been done before.
How far do you think Donald Trump is prepared to go with $500 billion at stake?
All the way.
You know, the losers, if this trade war continues, and if you don't want to call it a trade war, that's up to you, but the rest of the world is calling it a trade war. And if it does...
No. Can I say something? The globalist and the globalist media propaganda machines are calling it a trade war, okay? It's been economic war. First off, please stop.
If there's a recession, who is it who loses their job?
By the way, recessions come and go. Okay, recessions come and go.
Yes, but if you lose your job, you lose the dignity of work, which is central to your agenda.
I think workers understand, and particularly people that back Donald Trump, that what he's trying to do is bring manufacturing jobs back to the United States and trying to reset this economy to the economy that we've had since the American system came up in the 19th century. They understand there could be some speed bumps on this, and that's what leadership's about. I mean, Donald Trump's actually gone to some of the states he won and said, hey, on the agricultural side, it could be some hits. Remember, China thinks of the United States and Australia in the same way. They think we're tributary states, okay? We're essentially Jamestown to their Great Britain. We send very few finished manufacturing goods and no high value-added manufacturing goods, right? We essentially send natural resources, agriculture products, copper and tin, what's extracted from the earth. And all Donald Trump is saying is that that's not the natural law of physics. That was human action. Human agency that did that. Wall Street in our country were the guys that shipped those jobs over there. And what Donald Trump's saying is have a vibrant, robust economy. You have to make things. You have to make high value-added things.
And you're prepared to go through a recession in order to achieve that? Is that what you just said?
I think the country's prepared to do what the country has to do. I'm not trying to dismiss recessions. Certainly don't want it, but recessions are part of the business cycle. We've had it. We've had recessions come and go for the last 2 years.
I'm actually shocked to hear you say that, because what we know happens in recessions is that particularly older members of the workforce lose a job that they never get back again. That for someone who's for the working man, for the hobbits, as you call them.
I would love to have a system. I would love to have a system in capitalism that didn't have business cycles. So far, we haven't.
But you don't have to have a recession.
But look, by divine providence, we are now in a 10-year recovery, right? Now, part of that's because we infused the system with trillions of dollars of capital and lifted up the elites. The working guys haven't gotten that benefit. President Trump's economic policies, nobody's talking about a recession. In fact, today the economists came out and they don't see any recession on the horizon, given his monetary. The dollar's the strongest it's ever been, or virtually strongest it's ever been.
I think the governor of the Bank of England said that the current trade policies that the United States has in play, and if they continue in this way, you could be looking at taking 1% off global growth, 2.5% off U.S. growth.
Okay, 2% off U.S. growth is now U.S. growth is projected at 5% or 4%.
So if you lose 2% is
3%.
You're prepared for that to happen in order to reset.
I think what economic nationalism, what President Trump is prepared for, is that in the reordering of the global supply chain, and that's what you're seeing. Put tariffs aside for a second. Look what's really happening. What you're having is a reordering of the global supply chain away from just solely of China being the manufacturer of the high-value annual manufacturer of everything. President Trump, who everybody dismissed as a rube, as everybody dismissed as a guy on Twitter that's so crude, okay? He's actually taking the long view, okay? The Chinese look at this in hundreds of years, and we in the Judeo-Christian West, of which Australia happens to be at the tip of the spear in the Pacific, have to start thinking in generational cycles. What you should view, I think, China as, in a large extent, particularly of what what they're doing in South Asia, what they're doing in sub-Saharan Africa, they're equivalent of the East India Company.
Yeah.
What they're trying to do is predatory.
When I say yes, I'm not agreeing. I'm nodding that I know what the East India Company is.
What it was,
just to be clear.
predatory lending. What it tries to do is go to smaller countries or weaker countries, lend them money that they know they can't pay back.
But why wouldn't Australia, whose economy has benefited so much from its proximity to and deals with China, why wouldn't Australia seek to take advantage of what's going to become available through Belt and Road? They will do it. If it meets our standards, Australia will look to participate.
I think that's the whole point. It's like the United States. We want a relationship with China. We'll have a great relationship with China. But we want it on terms that we have our sovereignty and that people in our country, like people in Australia, make their decisions. Look, I'm a hawk. I'm a hawk on China. I'm a hawk on China because eventually I believe if this regime is not confronted, if this regime is not confronted, bad things are going to happen. And I think they have to be confronted now. I think they absolutely have to be confronted now. I think Turnbull has been way too much of an appeaser, and I think that's not going to turn out well. But here's the good news. Right now, you have a much more vibrant debate in Australia. And this is why I say you're a canary in the mine shaft. You have a much more robust debate in Australia than we're having here in the United States. In the United States, we're just starting that. And that's why I keep pointing to Australia. I say, look, these guys played by the rules. Look where the situation they are today. And many of the people who are comfortable with that are not comfortable today. And here's the beauty of it. It doesn't really deal with political ideology. You have many progressives down there saying, hey, we're quite upset about this. So I think it's going to play out very interestingly, and I think Australia's at the tip of the spear of this.
You spent some time over the last months in different places in the world trying to link up right-wing movements. Let's look at how Australia looks through Steve Bannon's eyes. Do you have any interest or connections with Australian politicians?
Well, first off, we got our hands full here because of this populist nationalist revolt. Clearly, this November, we've got another massive election that's going to really determine the future and direction of the Trump administration and this movement. I have announced that the movement's going to be a global operation, helping be in connective tissue for ideas, communication, polling, analytics.
And do you see Australia being brought into that?
I absolutely see Australia is going to be a hotbed of populism, just knowing the cussedness and grit of the Australian people. Remember, one thing is about populism, it's about getting decision-making away from a set of kind of global elites, the Goldman Sachses of the world, the party at Davos, and get it back to working-class people and middle-class people.
And Davos is the international meeting of economists and world leaders held in a very swanky Swiss city every year in the mountains, ski town, just so everyone's clear about your labels. You're used to them, we're not. Now, let's just talk about that economic nationalism. You say that there's potential for that to take root in Australia. How do you stop economic nationalism morphing into something that is essentially racist?
I don't think economic nationalism has anything to do with race. In fact, what I keep saying here, it doesn't matter. Remember, it doesn't matter if you're about your religion. It doesn't matter your ethnicity, your color. It doesn't matter your gender. It doesn't matter your sexual preference. All of that's totally irrelevant.
You say that, and I've watched lots of interviews, and I've watched people ask you or accuse you in various ways of being a racist, and there's no evidence that that's what you are. But do you understand what that group of people, the particularly disenfranchised white workers in America,
but the white workers are not racist.
How that turns into racism?
See, this is another thing. The white workers in this country are not racist. Do we have an element like tried to march here the other day? And how many guys showed up? 6. Well, my point is that such an infinitesimal. I come from the American South. Okay? It's such an infinitesimal, small percentage of people, and they're only made important because the left media gives them a microphone. The other day, we had thousands of police officers and hundreds of media, and 6 guys showed up, 20 guys showed up. It was nothing. It's a joke.
What happened a year ago was not a joke.
Well, what happened a year ago, and I've said this from day one, the neo-Confederates, the neo-Nazis, the KKK have no place in American society.
We condemn in the strongest possible terms this egregious display of hatred, bigotry, and violence on many sides.
You know what an unambiguous declaration against people wielding swastikas sounds like, and that's not what we heard.
President Trump has been adamant about that. He has condemned the neo-Nazis, condemned the KKK, he has condemned the neo-Confederates. You're hearing what your mainstream media, here's what they want to hear. They're never going to let Trump off the hook on this. They're just not going to do it. They're going to continue to pound that. But I got to tell you, as long as you don't take responsibility, the two things the mainstream media have done. Number one, they've given a bunch of marginal, dangerous people a platform.
But you know how to harness their anger too, don't you? You've worked out a way to try and separate yourself and your views from them, but at the same time, their comments filled the Breitbart website. You
You're missing the point. That anger is about economic. That anger is about the $880 billion to the $4.5 trillion. It's about the wealth. What it's about is a set of elites that took care of themselves and basically screwed over the American worker and the American middle class. The anger comes because people are rational. They look out there and they say, hey, it's my pension fund and my insurance company, my insurance policy, that's the underpinnings of Wall Street.
Do you understand what transforms that into racism when it happens? Because it does. We've seen people express it in racism.
You can beat this dog all day.
What you have seen is people with racist views cleave to your economic nationalist movement.
But it doesn't cleave. This is my point. It's such a de minimis. What the media always says, and you always go back to the same thing. Aren't you worried about this 0.1% that when we put the cameras on them, say, oh yeah, we support that, versus the basics of the argument? Here's the argument. The Republican Party is being turned into a workers' party. The workers in this country are finally standing up for themselves. This movement's not going to stop. And it doesn't matter how many liberal journalists come in here and say, oh, this is a bunch of fascists, this is a bunch of Nazis, this is a bunch of racists. And this is why you've lost so much credibility. This is why the mainstream media in this country has lost so much credibility.
Don't put me in that crowd. I'm not running with that crowd.
By the way, you're completely arguing the point over and over again. That's what I said in France.
Let them call you racist.
Laissez-vous appeler raciste.
Let them call you xenophobes.
Mais laissez-les vous appeler xénophobes.
Let them call you nativist.
Laissez-vous les appeler nativistes.
Wear it as a badge of honor.
Portez-le comme un badge d'honneur.
When they can't beat you on the facts, what they're always going to go back and do is the same parlor trick they've always had, and that parlor trick's very simple. They're going to call you racist.
Okay,
they're going to call you a xenophobe. They're going to call you that. And I said that accusation, wear that accusation as a badge of pride, because the accusation cannot be. They can't debate you on the facts, and they'll never debate you on the facts.
Let's be very clear about that. So what you're talking about is what people said in response to what you said at the Le Pen rally in Lille, which is to, if they call you a racist, wear it as a badge of pride. So
hang on.
I know
but look at the predicate.
Look at the predicate.
Look at the predicate.
You make a speech, but it's my turn to ask a question. You're standing there in a party that is steeped in a history of anti-Semitism.
Look at the predicate. Look at the predicate in that speech.
Yes, I have.
I said when they can't beat you on the facts, because what Donald Trump has done has the lowest unemployment in the history of African Americans in our country, the lowest unemployment in Hispanics in our country. We now have wages rising among
17 years for the Hispanics.
17. By the way, I think the other day it actually went to the lowest ever. But we'll double check that. I'm sure you'll fact check me later. And I said, when they can't beat you on the facts, what they're going to do is go back to the old trick of xenophobe, nativist, racist. Wear that accusation as a badge of pride, because then in the argument, you know you've got them.
You understand perfectly well the history of that party that is steeped in virulent anti-Semitism. So when you say to those supporters, that is the context for you using the word racist.
But no, look at that. Look how that party's evolved over time.
Yes.
Look how they've cut loose. In fact, the fathers cut them loose. Look at the evolution, and look at that audience. That's what. By the way, they left behind. They were started, and they had certain taints of anti-Semitism, and they've left that behind.
Very strong taints. Let's be clear. Let's just call a spade a spade.
Okay, but then let's be clear. Let's call a spade today. When people went to the polls in France, and particularly, I think she split the youth vote. She got a third, and Macron got a third. When people went to the polls in France, and young people under 35 went to the polls, they were not voting for anti-Semitism, okay? They're not even close. And for you guys to keep harkening back to that shows you're afraid of dealing with what they are trying to deal with there. This is about economic nationalism. This is about populism. But to smear them all the time with racism, I think is a great disservice. The Front National should be beaten. It should be argued and either win or beaten on the facts as they exist today.
I think it's not a smear, it's a question about how the party has evolved and what it stands for and what its history means to the party now. Obviously, these are the choices that you make that cause people to ask questions to understand where it is
I'm proud of those
that you're
choices.
coming from.
I'm proud of those choices. I'm proud of these. I'm proud of Salvini. Look what happened in Italy. What happened in Italy is and that's why I said, in the world stage today, the two most important places politically to look is Australia because of the situation with China, and on your reset, and Italy. In Italy, you had a party ran that was a left-wing party and a right-wing party. One was a populist and one was nationalist. Who knows if it's going to be successful? I think it is, but it's going to be messy, like democracy is messy.
So this was preceded by your involvement in Brexit with UKIP and Nigel Farage.
We've got our country back. The sun has risen on an independent, united kingdom. The EU's failing, the EU's dying. I hope we've knocked the first brick out of the wall. I hope this is the first step towards a Europe of sovereign nation states.
You've described Brexit and Trump as an inflection point. What does that mean?
Well, I said, first off, the inextricably linked. And what links them, people didn't, I think, put together that's what we started covering and setting up an operation in England many years ago. Because we saw, really, it was China. I think what you saw is the deindustrialization of Western Europe and the deindustrialization of the United States. And you could see what drove Brexit, what surprised all the pundits, the geniuses, was the labor vote. It was the Midlands labor vote that voted for Brexit. You know, Boris Johnson and those guys kind of ran, they were the official Leave party, and they ran that, hey, Brussels has too much control, they control our courts. A very intellectual argument I agree with, but it wasn't the emotional argument of the immigration argument that Nigel Farage. What Nigel Farage said, hey, because the immigration policies we have, your jobs are going to be replaced by lower cost labor that can come into the country, and we've exported all the high value added manufacturing jobs out of here. Kind of the same argument, different in degree but not in kind of the argument we made several months later in the United States and won on that. I think it's a winning argument. That's what you're seeing in Europe right now.
And do you think you have any chance of bringing those right-wing movements in Europe together?
I think what we'll do is be a connective tissue. Right there, we're not trying to actually knit them together in one massive movement. But this revolution is global. It's coming to Australia. So I will be in Australia sometime this fall after our November elections.
See you then.
Thank you very much.
Cool.
You're good.
That got messy. I've got 15 other, obviously, but we'll take that up in the fall.
Yeah, I'd love it. That's fantastic. You're fantastic. That was great.